Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Right.
We're all about taking those fascinating sources you send us and extracting those gold nuggets, those key insights. It's like a shortcut to really becoming well-informed.
Absolutely.
And this time, we're diving into a story that's really grabbed our attention. It's the claims of Sophia Stewart and her connection to two absolute blockbuster franchises. We're talking The Matrix and Terminator.
Yeah, two huge names in film.
For sure. So based on the interviews you sent us, we're going to unpack Sophia Stewart's allegations that both of these films, well, they actually came from her copyrighted work.
Right. And it's a story that goes way beyond just the films themselves. It gets into the creative process, the whole legal maze of copyright law, and even delves into some pretty deep philosophical ideas that are woven into the movies themselves.
So let's just jump right into it. Right at the heart of this deep dive is Sophia Stewart's assertion. She says, point blank, that her work was the foundation for both of these iconic movies.
Yeah, she's very clear about that.
She's unwavering. She states that she wrote a book and a script called The Third Eye Matrix, and also, separately, Terminator.
Both of them, huh?
Both. And her main argument is that both the Matrix and Terminator films aren't original creations, but are adaptations of her copyrighted material. And this, she says, means there was an implied licensing agreement that she never got paid for, and a direct infringement of her copyright.
So she's saying they basically took her ideas and ran with them.
Exactly. And she's very careful to point out that she wasn't just trying to claim ownership of the Matrix and Terminator.
Okay.
Her legal actions were about getting financial justice, money, and damages because they adapted her work.
Right. So seeking compensation for what she felt was rightfully hers.
Exactly. And she's very clear that she brought 96 pieces of evidence to support her claim.
96, wow. So she's not messing around.
No, she's very serious about this. And the timeline is really important here.
Yeah, the timeline often is in cases like this.
Sophia Stewart points to very specific copyright dates for her work. May 1981, 1983, and February 6, 1984, for her book and scripts.
Interesting.
Then you have the original Terminator movie released on October 26, 1984, and then much later, The Matrix, on March 31st, 1999. So this chronology is a key part of her argument that her creations predate the films.
So she's laying the groundwork by establishing that her work existed first. Makes sense. What else does she say?
She also brings up some really interesting points about copyright and trademark issues. She claims that the filmmakers behind both The Matrix and Terminator never actually registered copyrights or trademarks for their work.
Wow, that's a big accusation.
It is. She's essentially saying that they filed information with the Library of Congress and the Copyright Office without proper registration, basically accusing them of fraud.
So if that's true, that would be a pretty big deal legally.
Right. And to add to that, she claims that she holds trademarks on the terms The Matrix and The Terminator.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Can you actually trademark terms like that? I mean, Matrix seems like a pretty common word.
This is where it gets tricky. Trademark law usually doesn't let you own generic terms. Sophia Stewart herself admits that words like matrix, she even points out it's a 7,000-year-old Latin word meaning a woman's womb, and it's in the Bible, and common names like cola are generally considered generic.
Right, so you can't just go around trademarking everyday words.
Exactly. So while Sophia Stewart knows that the word matrix has these ancient roots and biblical connections, getting a trademark on such a common term, especially in the entertainment industry, would be really hard. Trademark law is about making sure things are distinct to prevent people from just using regular words in their work and getting blocked.
So her trademark claim on Matrix might be a tough sell legally.
It might be.
Now, what about those later Matrix films? Did she have anything to say about those? I know a lot of fans weren't exactly thrilled with the sequels, especially Resurrection.
Oh, she definitely had something to say about them. She is not a fan, to put it mildly. She calls Resurrections regurgitation and claims it completely misses the point of her original concept.
So she's not just talking about disliking them as a viewer. She's saying they're fundamentally different from what she created.
Exactly. She specifically points to things like the absence of key characters like Morpheus and Trinity, or how they're portrayed differently from how she envisioned them. Also, what she considers the essential graphics, and of course, the whole red pill, blue pill choice, which she says is her idea.
Those are some of the most iconic elements from The Matrix. So she's saying the sequels missed the mark on those core elements that she believes she originated.
That's right. She even claims that fans of The Matrix, and get this, even some diehard fans demanded refunds because they felt like the new movies were so far off base. She even says Village Roadside Pictures, the distributor, got tricked and were given what she called garbage instead of a real Matrix sequel.
That's pretty harsh. So it
Yeah.
sounds like she's really passionate about her work and how it's been used.
Absolutely. She's a fighter. Let's talk about the legal battles she's faced. She's filed lawsuits against Warner Brothers, the Wachowskis, James Cameron, Gail Ann Hurd, and others, claiming they adapted her work without paying her or even asking.
Wow. That's a big list of Hollywood heavy hitters.
It is. And she also filed a RICO case.
RICO, as in the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act.
That's the one. You usually think of RICO being used to go after organized crime.
Right, like mob bosses and that kind of thing.
Exactly. But in her case, she's claiming all these different people and companies work together to rip her off and stop her from getting justice.
So she's alleging a large-scale conspiracy against her.
Right. She also claims that the defendants denied ever meeting her or seeing her work, something she strongly disagrees with.
That sounds like a classic he said, she said situation, which can be really hard to untangle in court.
It is. And to make her case, she argues that derivative works like the movies should belong to the original creator. She even compares it to a mother and her babies to illustrate the point.
That's an interesting analogy. So she's saying the movies are like offspring of her original work, and therefore she should have rights over them.
That's her argument. Now, she also says that people like James Cameron and the Wachowskis have avoided interviews on purpose. She believes they're doing this so they can't be forced to give depositions in potential lawsuits.
So she thinks they're trying to avoid saying anything that could be used against them legally. That makes sense from a legal strategy standpoint.
Right, and she talks about two specific court cases. The first one filed back in 2003.
Okay.
She says the timing of that lawsuit was because the U.S. Attorney's Office was allegedly pressuring her to lie about an FBI investigation.
Whoa, an FBI investigation. This is getting really serious. What was the FBI looking into?
Well, she states that the FBI investigation began on June 10th, 1999, right after The Matrix was released.
So the timing is certainly suspicious.
Right, and she claims that she was offered $5 million for her copyrights, but refused to take it.
$5 million? That's a lot of money to walk away from.
It is. She also claims that the legal system in California was corrupt, which is why she filed a later case in Utah. And she made some serious allegations that defense attorneys were hired to sabotage her case by withholding evidence.
Wow. Those are some bold claims. If true, that would be a major breach of legal ethics and could even be criminal.
She's not holding back. She even references a ruling by Judge Margaret Morrow, which she believes means that simply acknowledging her work in the films would have been enough legally.
So she's suggesting that the court recognize some connection between her work and the movies, even if the final judgment wasn't in her favor.
That's her interpretation. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the deeper meaning behind The Matrix and Terminator. Sophia Stewart wanted to create what she calls the first metaphysical movies, blending spirituality and science.
So not just your typical sci-fi action flicks. She wanted to explore bigger questions about existence and consciousness.
Exactly. And she has a very specific way of seeing things. She interprets Star Wars not just as science fiction, but as a biblical story. She talks about wars in heaven and sees Darth Vader as a representation of the devil.
Interesting. So she's looking for deeper spiritual meaning even in popular movies.
Right. And when it comes to The Matrix and Terminator, she envisioned them as representing the second coming of Christ, exploring themes of human evolution and the contact between man and machine.
Wow. So she's bringing some really big ideas into these science fiction stories.
She is. She even points out that Neo's name is an anagram for the One, directly connecting him to biblical references and Jesus.
That's a pretty clever connection. It definitely adds another layer to the character.
And she goes on to highlight all sorts of other biblical parallels in both franchises, talking about Trinity, the Oracle, and Morpheus as figures with connections to Christian theology.
So she's building a whole allegorical framework within these sci-fi universes. It's almost like she's creating a modern mythology.
In a way, she is. And remember how she talked about matrix being an ancient word for the woman's womb? She ties that into her concept of the matrix itself, creating a metaphor for creation, birth, and even spiritual rebirth within the simulated reality.
That's pretty deep. So she's connecting this futuristic technology to ancient ideas about life and creation.
Exactly. And she even explains the astral body as a kind of early version of the virtual self we see in the Matrix. So for her, the concept of virtual reality was already present in these older metaphysical ideas.
That's an interesting take on the origins of virtual reality. It shows how science fiction can sometimes borrow from older philosophical and spiritual concepts.
And she points to Neo's rebirth scene in the liquid-filled pod as a deliberate nod to baptism and rebirth rituals.
Ah, so even the visuals are loaded with symbolic meaning for her.
Absolutely. And even those famous bullet dodging scenes, she doesn't see them as just physical stunts. For her, it's about bending energy through mental focus, kind of like a spiritual or metaphysical way of manipulating reality.
So she's envisioning a world where the mind has a lot more power over the physical world than we typically think. That definitely fits with her overall metaphysical approach.
Now let's talk a little about Sophia Stewart herself. She describes herself as a child prodigy who was reading and writing from a very young age. She also mentions having a heightened sense of consciousness even as a child.
So she had a sense that she was different, special even.
Right. And she believes this early development contributed to her creative drive and her belief in her ideas. She also connects some of her knowledge and inspiration to her Cherokee heritage, specifically referencing the concept of Cheyenne.
So her cultural background plays a role in shaping her worldview and the stories she wants to tell.
Definitely. And she sees her concept for the artificial intelligence in Terminator, especially the time travel element, as way ahead of its time. She contrasts it with older, simpler depictions of robots like in H.G. Wells' work.
So she's claiming to have envisioned a more sophisticated and realistic form of AI that goes beyond those classic sci-fi tropes.
That's right. And remember how she saw Star Wars as a biblical story. Even before she wrote The Matrix or Terminator, she was already looking for those deeper allegorical meanings in movies.
That's consistent with how she interprets everything else. She's always looking for the deeper meaning, the spiritual connections.
Exactly. Now here's something interesting. While she was at USC Film School, she was also working in the film industry and the legal field. She had experience at a law firm in Beverly Hills, Columbia Pictures, and with an independent producer.
Wow, that's a really diverse background. It sounds like she was immersing herself in all aspects of the entertainment industry.
She was. And that experience probably gave her a unique perspective on the business side of filmmaking, especially when it comes to things like copyright.
Absolutely. Having that legal background would have made her much more aware of those issues than the average film student.
Right. She even tried to get her work noticed early on. She sent her script treatment to 20th Century Fox, hoping to connect with George Lucas.
So she was ambitious and proactive. She wasn't just waiting for someone to discover her.
Not at all. And she mentions that a vice president at Fox, Susan Mesbach, actually got hold of her book and was interested in it.
So her work was definitely making the rounds in Hollywood, at least to some extent.
It was. And she didn't just focus on Hollywood. She sent her manuscript to a comic book company in Chicago after seeing an ad.
So she was exploring different avenues for her work, thinking beyond just movies.
Right. And she claims that a comic book based on her work actually got made, but was then pulled after she contacted Warner Brothers about The Matrix.
If that's true, that could be a big piece of evidence in her favor. It would suggest that her work was known and possibly adapted without her permission.
Now let's talk about something really important. Race and representation. Sophia Stewart says that Neo and all the main characters in The Matrix were supposed to be black in her original vision.
So diversity and representation were at the forefront of her mind right from the start.
Absolutely. She even mentions a 1981 article in the Los Angeles Sentinel that talked about her creating a science fiction story with a black superhero.
That's a very specific piece of evidence that could help support her claim. If that article exists, it predates The Matrix by a long shot.
And she criticizes the lack of black people in the future, as usually shown in what she calls white science fiction.
Right. She's pointing to a historical lack of diversity and inclusion in the sci-fi genre. It's something that a lot of people have been talking about in recent years.
And she makes a distinction between Black Panther, who she sees as the first African superhero, and her Matrix concept, which she believes was the first Black American superhero.
So she's making a specific point about representing Black American experiences and perspectives within the sci-fi genre.
Exactly. And here's a personal connection. She was once engaged to Muhammad Ali, whom she describes as a real living Black superhero and the inspiration for Neo.
Wow, that's a powerful connection. It really adds another layer to her vision for the character and the story.
It does. And she also mentions that Will Smith was considered for the role of Neo.
If true, that would lend some credence to her claim that the character was originally intended to be Black.
She also talks about her experience as a Black woman and how she feels that's affected her struggle to get justice.
That raises important questions about systemic biases and how they might impact creators from marginalized communities. It's a conversation that's happening across many industries, not just entertainment.
Now, where do things stand today? Sophia Stewart claims to have won a RICO case in Nevada, but she also mentions that there are people trying to fix it, implying that the fight isn't over.
So even with a legal victory, she feels like there are still powerful forces working against her.
She does. She also makes some pretty big allegations connecting all this to the Clinton Foundation and claims of money laundering.
Those are some serious accusations that would need to be carefully investigated and corroborated.
Absolutely. But despite all of this, she says she's not driven by any political agenda. Her main focus, she says, is protecting people's rights.
So she sees herself as fighting for a larger principle, not just for herself.
Right. And when it comes to The Matrix, she views the later film, Resurrections, as a kind of dream sequence, a way to bring back the characters without messing with the original story.
That's a creative way of looking at it. It allows her to reconcile the later films with her original vision, even if they don't fully align.
And she says that any future Matrix projects will build on the original trilogy with better graphics and new elements, but not a reboot or remake.
So she's open to the story continuing as long as it respects the foundation she laid.
And she ends with a powerful call to action. She wants people to wake up from the Matrix, to see through illusions and lies, and make their own choices, just like with the red pill and blue pill.
That's a message that resonates far beyond the movies. It's about questioning the world around us and taking control of our own lives.
She also talks about how she predicted the success of the Black Panther movie, comparing it to the rise of black-led films back in the 1970s.
So she's aware of historical trends and how they can influence Hollywood. It sounds like she's optimistic about the future of representation in film.
She is. She's also very aware of how streaming services are changing the media landscape and how traditional studios are losing their grip.
That's a huge shift that's happening right now, and it's creating opportunities for new voices and stories to be told.
Absolutely. And she sees the rise of technologies like facial recognition and the loss of privacy as things that were already hinted at in The Matrix.
So in a way, she sees her work as a warning about the potential dangers of technology if it's not used responsibly.
Right. And her final message is a warning that many people are living in a state of bondage, not truly free. She urges everyone to use their free will and question the limitations they see around them.
It's a powerful message about taking ownership of our lives and not letting ourselves be controlled by external forces.
So there you have it. Sophia Stewart's story is complex, challenging, and thought-provoking.
It is, and it raises a lot of important questions about creativity, ownership, and justice in the world of entertainment.
We've explored her claims of copyright infringement, her unique philosophical interpretations of the films, and her ongoing legal battles. It's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's a reminder that there's often more to the story than meets the eye, especially when it comes to Hollywood.
And regardless of what you believe about her claims, Sophia Stewart's story gives us a new way of looking at The Matrix and Terminator. It makes us think about the unseen struggles of creators and the importance of protecting intellectual property.
It also highlights the power of storytelling and how it can be used to explore deep philosophical and social issues.
So we encourage you to do your own research, think critically, and come to your own conclusions. This deep dive has been about giving you the information and the different perspective so you can make up your own mind.
Because at the end of the day, Sophia Stewart's story is a reminder that even in a world of blockbusters and special effects, the human story behind the creation is often the most compelling one of all.
And with that, we'll leave you to ponder these ideas and see where your own deep dive takes you. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.